the edges of reality is a misty, shadowy dimension known as the Ethereal Plane. Within Dungeons & Dragons, the Ethereal Plane is a place of transition, an ocean of sorts, and where it touches the material plane, it's like how water laps onto the shore. A foggy, muted, distorted, and empty echo of the material plane. Well, almost empty. Almost empty, for the ethereal plane is home to several types of intangible creatures, such as wraiths or phase spiders. Yet, there are far stranger horrors that lurk deep within the mists. Horrors that are utterly divorced from the material planes in their evolution. Yet, thanks to the border ethereal's nature, they can watch the mortals on the material plane unseen and unknown. Sometimes, they'll even come over to the material plane, but none would ever suspect them because these aliens from the ethereal could look like anyone. The dwarf drinking at the bar. The elf cleric praying at the temple. Your fellow adventurer standing at your back. The archaeologist shapeshifter. The great alien without the probes. The assumed identity. Let's talk about the Ethereal Doppelganger. So, what are we going to be covering? In this episode, first we're going to talk about what an Ethereal Doppelganger is. Next, we'll dive into its origins or try to figure out the possible origins. After that, we'll explore how I rebuilt the Ethereal Doppelganger for the 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and how they fare in combat. We'll close out then with some ideas about how to add the Ethereal Doppelganger not only as a monster of a week, but as part of an ongoing campaign. The Ethereal Doppelganger's first and only appearance came with the 3rd edition book Monster Manual 2, with a very, very interesting picture. An Ethereal Doppelganger is a monstrous humanoid shapeshifter from the ethereal plane that, apparently as a whole, the entire race is very fond of magic items, and they frequently visit the material plane in order to acquire new ones for their collections. This acquiring of magic items via shapeshifting seems to be the Ethereal Doppelganger's entire deal. The acquisition of magical objects via shapeshifting into people that will be going after the object that it wants. An Ethereal Doppelganger will use its brainlock ability to capture and bring a subject back to its lair. The Doppelganger then goes out of its way to make the subject comfortable and offers a deal. If the subject allows the Doppelganger to assume his or her identity and acquires the desired item, the Doppelganger will ensure the subject's comfort in the interim and return him or her unharmed to any desired location on the material plane afterwards. And, even more surprisingly, the Doppelganger is as good as their word. If the victim says no, the Doppelganger wipes any memory of the encounter from the subject's mind and then tries again with someone else. That's initially what drew me to the Ethereal Doppelganger. What a weird modus operandi. Then I saw the picture. So on the right, obviously, is my picture, and then on the left is the one that is from the book. Just take a look. Just take a nice big look. A gangly humanoid with slick skin, white eyes that have no pupils. Imagine a stereotypical gray alien, and you're like 90% there. However, being shape changers, they can and do take on other forms. Here's another little strange bit. What do they resemble and share the name with? Doppelganger. Really, look at these two images. One is the Doppelganger from the 5th edition book, and then the other one is the Ethereal Doppelganger from 3rd edition. Just look at them. Which begs the question, are they related? Alright, so what do we actually know about the Ethereal Doppelganger? Not too much, since there is but one entry for them, but here's what we got. First, Ethereal Doppelgangers are lawful evil in alignment. Next, They are shapeshifters that can take on even the memories and capabilities of their victims. They also body snatch their victims as well, adding to that bit of horror. Ethereal doppelgangers love magical items like we all do. They are very much social interaction oriented and have really, really weak combat abilities, especially for a CR15 creature. Their claw attack is 1d4 minus 1, which they can do twice. We'll look at that a little bit later, but that is shockingly low for a CR15 monster. As the name suggests, ethereal doppelgangers are from the ethereal plane. But how? And where? And why? In the Great Wheel cosmology model, the ethereal plane exists next to and connected to the material plane as well as the inner planes. The ethereal plane is made up of two aspects. The part of the ethereal plane that touches the inner planes as well as the material plane is known as the border ethereal. This is the part of the ethereal plane where a traveler could still see into the adjacent plane. The rest of the ethereal plane is known as the deep ethereal. And the deep ethereal is where it gets really weird. The particular weirdness I want to focus on in the deep ethereal is that within it is large swirling blobs of protomatter. Protomatter is kind of what it sounds like, cosmic building materials. The protomatter swirling about in the ethereal plane could be used to create demiplanes, either through natural fluctuations in the deep ethereal, grouping the material together until it reaches critical mass, or by the actions of very powerful beings, such as wizards or gods. These demiplanes can really be anything. Some might resemble the inner planes, or be twisted mashups of them, or have their own entire rule set. Most of these demiplanes are pretty short-lived, either eventually breaking up or merging with another plane. Yet some of these demiplanes do survive. We know almost nothing about the demiplane of the ethereal doppelgangers. Where they live is described as in buildings that serve a combination showrooms, vaults, prisons, and shops. The demiplane almost sounds like a city. The entire plane is but one giant city. I think that's pretty interesting given the types of places that are given. Showrooms, vaults, prisons, and shops. All places one would store things and people, which ties into their own desire to gather magical objects. What if the ethereal doppelgangers weren't the original inhabitants, but were once the original things that were stored at this demiplane? Hailing back all the way from first edition, doppelgangers are monstrous humanoids known for their shape-shifting abilities that allow them to mimic almost any humanoid creature. They even have some mind-reading capabilities that aid them in creating near-perfect disguises and plucking secrets from unguarded minds. Just not as good as the ethereal doppelgangers. Reading into them, doppelgangers actually seem like an immature or low-level version of the ethereal doppelgangers, which might literally be the case. My theory is that the ethereal doppelgangers were once doppelgangers that were captured and changed by a devil. The reason I think it's a devil is because A, the ethereal doppelgangers know Infernal, which is the language of devils, and 2, their lawful evil nature versus the neutral nature that is the doppelganger. I think how weak the ethereal doppelgangers are in 3.5 shows us as well. They were made to be the perfect infiltrator, but that's it. They have fast healing, magic resistance, damage resistance. However, when it comes to actually fighting, they are just incredibly weak at it. Someone wanted a powerful infiltrator, but didn't want them to be a threat. I can see a devil doing that. I can even see why a devil would want the ethereal doppelgangers in the first place. to kidnap people. The home of the Ethereal Doppelgangers are noted to have prisons, but the Doppelgangers, they're interested in getting magical objects, not people. When they do take people, they ensure the subject is comfortable, which really doesn't sound like prisons. A devil would have use for those prisons, for the people that it has the Ethereal Doppelganger take. Given how the Doppelgangers treat their subjects now, including letting them go, I just don't think that devil is around anymore. This is the weakest part of my theory, but I'm going to bring it up because how I came up with it. A monster entry in 3.5 typically includes organization, such as how the monster is in terms of numbers that they might appear in a conflict. For the Ethereal Doppelganger, their organization is either solitary or in a squad, that squad being one Ethereal Doppelganger plus 4 to 6 Yan. That's what caught my attention. What a bizarre pairing. A shapeshifter and a group of weak genies. There has to be a story there. A Yan might be a creature I cover in the future, but long story short, a Yan is the weakest of all the genies, and not intimately bound to one particular element or plane like the others. In fact, within, they are composed of all the elements: air, earth, fire, and water, but seemingly do not have the ability to grant wishes like the other genies. Of all the other genies, the Yan have the strongest relationship with the Jinn. I think that's where our connection is. When a doppelganger does its assumed identity ability, they possess the other creature's memories, plus its alignment and all of its abilities. This connection is so deep that if an ethereal doppelganger commits an act that runs counter to its new identity's alignment, it immediately is forced back to its natural form for a brief moment. The scenario I have in my head is that an ethereal doppelganger assumed the form of a Yan and then encountered a Jinn. Classically, genies are sometimes bound to magical objects and are forced to grant wishes to those that free them. As you can imagine, the genies resent this enslavement, and those freed from this imprisonment are almost incredibly grateful to those that free them, thus the wishes. How I see this playing out is the ethereal doppelganger, driven by the Yan's memory, frees the Jinn from its imprisonment. The Jinn then grants the wishes of the ethereal doppelganger to be free, and doing so actually enlists the Yan to help. The reason I think it's the Yan, besides the fact of the organization, is that the Yan are capable of traveling instantly to the ethereal plane, and given their resistance towards fire, honestly, when a whole bunch of the Yan showed up in that demi-plane, the devil didn't have much of a chance. And I think to this day, the two groups still work together from time to time. Not all the time, but time to time. Nothing like having a perfect shapeshifter or genies as friends. Once freed, I think the ethereal doppelgangers lost any interest in their former ways of kidnapping people, but remained obsessed with acquiring magical items. Given that they have shops in their demi-planes, I think it's the hunt for magical items that's the part that really matters to them. After that, it can be displayed, stored, held, or whatever. Amazing magical item vendors, if you can find them, I bet. They remain evil even after the devil was left, destroyed, whatever, because they are utterly ruthless in their pursuit of magical items. Which is a pretty selfish thing to do, but I think it's the lawful side that really keeps them in check. After the devil's machinations, they probably agreed as a whole never to hold people against their will. There's some leeway there. They can still kidnap them, but if the kidnappee doesn't want to stay, the doppelganger then tries with a different mortal. I really love the stories, the story options that can be told here, but first, let's talk mechanics. Honestly, as a CR15 monster, the Ethereal Doppelganger is not impressive. They have a claw attack so weak, it might as well not even be there. Honestly, that's my biggest challenge updating the Ethereal Doppelganger to 2024 edition of D&D. The very first thing I did was upgrade the ability scores of the Ethereal Doppelganger. I kept the high intelligence, but I upped the charisma to 20 and the dexterity to 18. For a creature built on social infiltration, to me, having a charisma at 20 is a must. The dexterity got a bump actually thanks to the influence of the 5th edition Doppelganger. I also went with several proficiencies and skills, the social skills that you would expect: deception, insight, and persuasion, all tools that a social infiltrator should have. Defense-wise, the Ethereal Doppelganger has a pretty basic AC and hit points for its CR. What does help in terms of survivability is it has bludgeoning, psychic, and slashing damage resistances. Not piercing, which is noted in 3.5 to bypass its damage resistance, weirdly enough. It is immune to charmed, which once again, is kind of ideal for an infiltrator. When it comes to what the Ethereal Doppelganger can do, that's where they both shine and where I had some work to do. In terms of spellcasting, yes, the Ethereal Doppelganger is capable of casting spells. Some pretty useful spells considering its MO. Detect Thoughts allows it to find thinking creatures needed for its shapeshifting, as well as read their minds to find the right target to turn into for its current mission. I added the spell Modify Memory to the spell list because it's noted in the monster entry that it wipes the memories of those that don't accept its deal. I made it an at-will spell for the Doppelganger since it's really not that great in combat, but I think it has a lot of storytelling potential. Plane shift is there for the Ethereal Doppelganger to get back home or back to the material plane, bringing its target with it. I went with 3 times a day, following the logic of an SOP of 1, going to the material plane, 2, bringing the target back to the demi-plane, and then 3, teleporting back to the material plane. However, don't ignore the part of plane shift that can actually operate sort of as banishment, save that it's permanent, giving the Ethereal Doppelganger the means to grab somebody it wants to disguise itself or remove them from the fight. Plus, despite my upgrades, the Ethereal Doppelganger would still prefer not to get in a fight if possible. Still, should it come to it, now the Ethereal Doppelganger can. A lot of my work mostly focused on its ability to attack. Instead of that sad 1d4 -1 claw attack, I gave it 3 attack actions. Claws got a spiffy new suit, dealing more damage with some psychic damage to boot. Given its sneaky nature, a range attack felt very appropriate, so I added one, the Psi Ray. With the great alien inspiration, you can call it a ray gun, or you can call it a beam from the brain if you want to keep it more fantasy. Either way, it's some psychic damage at range. Multi-attack allows the Ethereal Doppelganger to use either both, one or the other, 2 times, with a follow-up of Brain Lock. The new Brain Lock ability is an intelligence saving throw that, on a failure, causes the creature with an intelligence score of 3 or higher that the Doppelganger can see within 100 feet to gain the stun condition until the end of the Ethereal Doppelganger's next turn. This is absolutely critical towards the Ethereal Doppelganger's survival, since in theory, it can stop one opponent from trying to kill it in a turn, or stun an alerted guard that's trying to chase it as it escapes, or stuns a potential creature whose form it wants to assume before whisking it away. Brain Lock, by the way, is not actually the 3rd action I was talking about. That would be Mind Blast. Even with 2 good attack options for its CR with a nice stun on a stick, I felt like the Ethereal Doppelganger really needed an edge. Taking a page out of another psychic creature, the Mind Flayer, I gave the Ethereal Doppelganger Mind Blast. Mind Blast fits a heavy-hitting attack against a group of enemies, as well as adding a stun effect, which is what the Ethereal Doppelganger loves. That leads me to its most important abilities. assume identity, and shapeshift. Shapeshift is like the standard doppelganger ability. The creature shapeshifts into a medium or small humanoid or returns to its true form. Notably, its game statistics, other than its size, remains the same in each form. Assume identity targets a stunned creature which has been stunned either via brainlock, mind blast, whatever the circumstance. On a failure, the doppelganger absorbs the target's memories and personality. After absorbing the target's identity, the doppelganger can assume its form with shapeshift. The difference being now that the doppelganger shapeshifts into that particular target, so its game statistics do change. When it shapeshifts into the target, the doppelganger gains the traits and the action the target had when it was absorbed. If it absorbed the identity of a gladiator, it can now parry, and if it grabs a shield, shield bash. If it assumed identity of a questing knight, it now has the aura of bravery and spells, including greater restoration. That's just NPCs. If it assumed identity of a rogue, it can now sneak attack and dash as a bonus action. If it assumed identity of a druid, it can now wild shape. If it assumed the identity of a wizard, it can now use its spellcasting to cast any of the spells the wizard knew once a day. Here's the real neat part, and the part of the ability that keeps the Ethereal Doppelganger from truly being evil with this ability. If the Ethereal Doppelganger commits an act that runs counter to the target's alignment, ideals, or bonds, it immediately shapeshifts back to its true form and can't use shapeshift for 1 minute. If you suspect an Ethereal Doppelganger, you can try to prove it by forcing them to do something that its assumed form normally wouldn't do. A neat storytelling bit we'll get into. Now, after all these updates, how's the Ethereal Doppelganger in a fight? Well, I think the trick with an Ethereal Doppelganger fight is there even being a fight at all. First is even suspecting that there is an Ethereal Doppelganger, since it has the memories and capabilities of the person it shapeshifted into. Next, you have to be sure. You just can't attack folks on a whim. Well, adventurers can, but they really shouldn't. Anyway, either way, trying to be sure is tricky since, once more, they have the memories and capabilities of that person. Say you are able to uncover and confront it, you might not remember that you did so if the Ethereal Doppelganger gets that chance with the Modify Memory spell. Worst case scenario for the Doppelganger, if someone knows and they can't be made to forget, the Ethereal Doppelganger can go assume the identity of someone else entirely. Probably not ideal, but it's definitely a tool it has, and then you kind of have to start the whole process over again. But let's say you're able to find and identify the Ethereal Doppelganger. Then what? When a fight begins, the Ethereal Doppelganger does not want to be there. Ethereal Doppelgangers are there to loot objects, but occasionally people. But unlike adventurers, they don't just have to kill to get it. They want a magical object, and they infiltrate until they get it. With the ability to plane shift 3 times a day, if it hasn't used them up, the players will have to come up with a plan to entrap it, either with counterspell or wards to stop the teleporting. Let's say you are able to stop it from escaping. Now you have to deal with a CR 15 creature that can throw out stuns every turn, Mind Blast occasionally, and has the capabilities of its current form, which could be a paladin with Divine Smite, a druid with Wild Shape, a wizard with Fireball, or barbarian with Rage. Either way, an Ethereal Doppelganger is going to be a heck of a fight. Storytelling in Ethereal Doppelganger should be about paranoia. Even if the party knows that doppelgangers are really about magic items and not murder, simply there being an Ethereal Doppelganger about means they can never be sure who to trust. We've all had a session, or a few sessions, where a player had to miss, but the character could not miss the action. Perhaps because they were in a dungeon delve, where it would make no sense for the character to just suddenly disappear. Most of the time, it's hand waved away that the character was there in the shadows and out of the way. What if instead the character was actually replaced by Ethereal Doppelganger? The party could be in a dungeon that has a magic item that the Ethereal Doppelganger wants, and so it replaced the character when the party wasn't looking. That way the DM wouldn't feel bad about playing the character. The players might not even realize that the DM wasn't playing the character, but was actually playing the Ethereal Doppelganger. It would explain why the character might not remember stuff that happened during the session. It could be just an explanation about why the character was still involved with the session. Or it could turn into full-blown paranoia even for the players when they realize the DM wasn't playing the character, but something else. The party needs to get something in what is basically a fortress. Lots of guards, lots of checkpoints, and lots of magic. Not impossible to infiltrate, but pretty hard. The vault they need to get into has multiple locks that are both magical and mundane. But adventurers have pulled off crazier things. Well, here's the biggest problem. They need the head person in order to unlock the final lock. It won't open for literally anything else. Grabbing the individual is always an option, but given they physically need them to open the lock, not a great one. Disguise spells could work, but they need the knowledge of the lock as well. Enter the Ethereal Doppelganger, essentially a merc for hire. The party offers a magical item from the vault in exchange for help opening it. The story essentially becomes Ocean's 11, the party scouting and devising plans to distract, infiltrate, and more importantly, get out alive, ideally without getting caught or needing to throw fireballs behind them as they run. Another story could be about an Ethereal Doppelganger that is currently trapped in a form it took. A noble in a royal court, maybe the ruler of the land. How it got trapped, it isn't sure, nor why it can't use its plane shift to go home. It obviously can't go to a court priest or wizard lest they discover the Ethereal Doppelganger. So instead, it needs a few outside contractors, i.e. adventurers, to help while trying to figure out what's going on while keeping them in the dark. The story could be that another Ethereal Doppelganger locked the first, wanting to get a magic item in question. The two of them were competing for it. Thus, the party will be tasked to find an Ethereal Doppelganger from an Ethereal Doppelganger, which I can only imagine will blow up some way gloriously. The paranoia will be off the charts. A group of Ethereal Doppelgangers could have come together for a big score, an artifact. They took the party who agreed to it for something else from the vault where the artifact was stored, let's say gold. When all is said and done, the party doesn't remember what happened, but they have a bunch of gold suddenly. However, the former owner wants that artifact back, and the Ethereal Doppelgangers, they didn't escape clean, so that owner thinks it was the party. Now the party is being hunted for an artifact they did not steal, did not have, and have no idea why everyone thinks that they do. I sincerely could have put down so many more story ideas. A rift off an alien invasion. Needing to get to the demiplane in order to buy a magical object that the Ethereal Doppelgangers took a long time ago. A wizard who disguises themselves as an Ethereal Doppelganger to get to the demiplane and is now trapped and needs the party to help rescue them. A doppelganger versus an Ethereal Doppelganger fight. Many different types of shapeshifters. Werewolf, dragon, Ethereal Doppelganger, all of them going after the same object. An Ethereal Doppelganger who is in so deep they forgot who they are. Honestly, I just love the story potential of the Ethereal Doppelganger, especially with my updates so they actually live up to their challenge rating. And I hope you love them too. In the description below, I have a link to a monster stat block for the Ethereal Doppelganger updated to the 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, ready for you to unleash upon your players. As we are a growing channel, if you found this interesting, please leave a like and a subscribe for all our future videos. It really does mean the world. Let me thank all of you for your time and wishing you all the best, until we meet again for our next monster.